Let us go north of the border to Neil Oliver, TV presenter, a man who, of course, knows a thing or two about living under the yoke of what I would call SNP oppression. Neil, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Can I just make clear that I have never had any presents from any prince, Saudi Arabian or otherwise? Of that, I am innocent.
Absolutely brilliant. Also, I suspect you've never been accused of bullying either. But it's always interesting, isn't it, when you get these characters who supposedly create communities of compassion. But here they are consulting with guys from Saudi Arabia and facing claims of bullying from the staff. I mean, what I do remember, and we'll get to this later with Angela Levin, so I'm not going to press the royalty on you. But I mean, you know, isn't it funny how often people who accuse others of bullying them turn out to have actually been bullies?
Well, I just know that when I see someone's bio on Twitter, if it has a heart or if it talks about love or kindness, I tend to avoid those people. Wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot barge pole. I think it's always an indicator of someone to be watched if they say that they're all about love and kindness.
Yes, I mean, I was amused actually this morning. I was just rereading your column from the Sunday Times on Sunday, and I wondered whether it was an allegory about your two dogs, you know, the fully grown 9-stone Gracie and the small pup, 4-month-old Jessie.
You know me too well.
I do. Well, you know, I take a great interest in your dogs, as you know. And I mean, I just wondered if it was an allegory for Salmond versus Sturgeon in some way.
Well, it's just, you know, when I watch our pup facing up to the big dog, and I think, you know, and she's so fearless, will not be bowed. Will not be cowed by the bigger dog's behaviour. And you know, as a dad, I'm sure you've been in the situation yourself. You're always having to say to your kids to stand up to bullies, because there really isn't anything else you can do. If you back down in the face of a bully, it just gets worse. And so I think I have to not give in to bullies, even though I'm a long way from the playground. And I'm now a 54-year-old man, but I take some of my inspiration from a little 4-month-old Irish Wolfhound pup who, you know, when the big dog tries to back her into a corner, she just comes in all paws flying, and I think, yes, that's the way it's done.
But that's it, right? And you can either be one of those people, or you could be the opposite of those people. And no matter how old you get, there are still plenty of people out there who want to try and bully you into submission. Some of them are politicians. Some of them work for, you know, government departments. Some of them would have you believe that you must do what you're told, and all of that feeds into where we currently are, doesn't it?
Yeah, I loved the line you had there. You attributed it to the Dalai Lama about if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.
Right.
That's one of those that gets attributed to other people. Right. But in essence, it's absolutely perfect. You know, there's a great freedom in if you just say what you truthfully think. You don't have to keep qualifying what you said before, because it becomes part of a continuing story. And that as well. So life can be quite simple in a way. You know, if you keep just simple things like standing up to bullies and telling the truth, you know, as you understand it. But yeah, the situation that we're in just now in Scotland is clearly. I find it looks exhausted to me. You know, I mean, we can go into the specifics of the individuals, of course we can, but the whole system has a kind of a sense of exhaustion around it. It looks like a game that's just being played by people who are so practiced in every nuance of the game that even they almost come across as being a bit bored with it. It's like watching people play, you know, noughts and crosses, tic-tac-toe, and there's a kind of a futility about it, because if both people understand the way the game works, you can't win, and you're just doing the moves. Right. And I think the inquiry feels like that. I thought it was very interesting watching Alex Salmond. I hadn't seen him not in the flesh. I was watching him on a TV screen, but I hadn't seen him for a while, and he looked different. You know, he looked I don't know. He looked tired and put upon in a way that I hadn't seen before. And of course, he's now a private citizen, right? And he's you know, and he doesn't, you know, he's paying his own way. And he's out there beyond the bubble of protection that's extended to politicians like Nicola Sturgeon, who are still in the game. Yes. And I think there was something. I think it was quite revealing. You know, that out away from the rarefied atmosphere of the protection of you know, the political world. You know, he really looked like a heavyweight boxer who had taken a lot of punches. Yes. he was still in there swinging, but he's formidable. By my goodness, he's a formidable character, and I think always will be.
Yeah.
Eloquent and a master of the spoken word. But he still looked different. But we're watching the committee itself. There's a kind of ennui about it. You can almost sense the atmosphere in the room is stuffy and stultifying.
Yes.
And this idea about breaching of the ministerial code, well, it almost belongs to another era. There's no, even supposing Nicola Sturgeon was to admit that she had broken ministerial code, it's not as though anyone's going to come along and put her in Parliament jail.
No.
And it won't necessitate her resignation if she doesn't want to. You can't make her resign. And the ministerial code, it belongs to a bygone era. It would be a bit like, when you watch somebody in the headmaster's office and the headmaster says, you've let the house down, you've let the school down, and you've let me down, but worst of all, you've let yourself down.
Right.
But in this context, Nicola Sturgeon is the headmistress.
Right.
And she's not about to give herself any consequences for doing this. And so watching it is just a bit tiring.
Yes, I think you're right. And also all the people playing the game are not affected by the outcome of it either way, particularly because they'll all still be doing the same thing. They'll all still be, turning up and getting their money and getting their expenses and living the life that they live until such time as they either get found out or get deselected, which is quite hard to do in Scotland because of proportional representation. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a kind of weird new reality, a bit like when Boris Johnson was accused and then found guilty of proroguing Parliament illegally. And everyone was talking about dragging him from Downing Street and locking him up. And people sort of misunderstood the term illegal because it wasn't actually illegal. In order to do something illegal, you have to break a law which was in place when you broke it. This was a law that was brought in after he broke, supposedly, the law that they then invented to accuse him of breaking. And you kind of go, there's too many lawyers here, obviously.
I think we've crossed a Rubicon into a different kind of political world. I don't think that kind of honour code is there anymore.
No.
I don't know the extent to which it ever was. Maybe it was all just smoke and mirrors at all time. But there was a sense, you did get a sense that people could be put into a certain set of circumstances where, although it wasn't a legal matter, there was a matter of personal reputation and personal honour which dictated or seemed to dictate a person's decisions to step away from public office. Like John Profumo or. But that,
people point to Henry McLeish, who was one of the first ministers of Scotland.
Indeed,
who
he
resigned.
had some financial irregularities about minor stuff by comparison, and yet there was still that he was still part of an older world where people said this just doesn't look good.
Right.
And I think everyone involved at the committee, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, previous First Minister Alex Salmond, I think they're so preoccupied with what they're doing that they're not really paying attention to how it is for the people looking on. On one side, you've got the people for whom Nicola Sturgeon can do no wrong, and they will never call for her resignation. And then on the other side, there are those in an equally binary position, who feel that 14 years of the SNP is too long. But the people at the heart of it are just so obsessed with their own performances on stage. They don't seem to care. Right. I think what people think. I think that's the saddest part of it. I think they're playing the game. They're obsessed with the game for its own sake, but they don't really care. And I don't think anyone's going to be doing any resigning, no matter what they're faced with. Do
you think, though, that there's a slight change in emphasis or behaviour because this is now a national story as opposed to just a Scottish story? That the people from London have come to look and see what's going on, and the sort of the rather protectionist Scottish media, aside from one or two exceptions, has now had to open its books, if you like, to see what it's been doing over the last couple of years, because there hasn't been an awful lot of scrutiny going on.
Yeah, well, I think it's more uncomfortable. I think having to face up to scrutiny is uncomfortable, and having a bright light turned on your behaviour and the behaviour of those that you master is uncomfortable. But as the past has shown, if your neck is of pure enough brass, then you've only got to tough it out. That was probably always the case. They've just got to tough it out. And because of the binary position that's there in Scotland, where about half the country is for and about half the country is against, And no matter what happens next, the positions of those people in those entrenched camps isn't going to change. And that's exhausting as well, because you think any victories that are had, be they in referenda or in elections or as the outcome of a report by a committee like this, it just doesn't matter. Because any victory is a Pyrrhic victory, because whoever wins, about half of the population is opposed to them, and won't be encouraged and won't be inclined to move in the direction that other side wants to go in. So it just feels it's like a bad dream. It's like walking through treacle in a nightmare, where you think we're just never going to get out of this, and the decision becomes: do I watch this out of some sort of morbid fascination, or do I not?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem as though there will be consequences of any meaningful sort.
Yes. And when I said, there's too many lawyers around, I wasn't kidding, because I think one of the things that society has suffered from in this country over the past 10 to 20 years is the sort of introduction of lawyers into almost every aspect of what we do. You can't get insurance anymore now for lawyers making noises, lawyers suing the NHS for things that they didn't do right, lawyers in politicians' pockets, and also lawyers becoming politicians. And so they all talk in a particular way, and I think they're not interested in really coming up with ideas. They're interested in kind of dulling everything down and dumbing everything down so that only they can talk about things for hours and hours and hours on end, and everybody kind of tunes out. I used to have this theory that Tony Blair actually did this in order to just make people so disinterested in politics they wouldn't bother voting anymore.
For me, a lot of it, yes, I agree, but I think a lot of it for me comes down is visible or audible in the language that's used. I struggle all the time. I try to remind myself not to allow my speech to become infected with the sort of legalese and litigious terms that you talk about. And it's not just legal terms. All the time I'm struggling to remember not to say things like going forward. Yes. Because anytime I hear those words escape me, I want to give myself a slap in the face. Yeah. And because I feel in the same way that our town centres have all become sort of homogenised by identical street furniture and the same branded shops, that you don't know where you are. Right. That character has gone away.
And you could be anywhere.
You could be anywhere. And sometimes when you listen to people talking, be they people in the media or politicians or lawyers, they've kind of they've infected one another's language, and we all use these essentially meaningless terms all the time. And I try to remember just to speak like me. Yes. And to use straightforward language rather than otherwise it's like a fur-lined groove that you can feel yourself sort of stumbling into. And I think it's partly because you think, well, if I keep on using these oft repeated phrases, I'll be safe. Right. Because I hear people saying them and they don't seem to get into trouble, so I'll say them too, and I'll be all right. Right. And I think it's incumbent upon us to, in the same, it's like safeguarding regional dialects or something, or it's so important, I think, to put things in your own words and to speak honestly, and not to be tricked into just using the jargon and the corporate speak. Corporate speak's everywhere. I know. I amuse myself.
I amuse myself sometimes when I've got nothing better to do. I look up some job descriptions of various jobs in the media, particularly now. Very, very conscious of it. And you read it, and it tells you what the job is, and it has a title that you don't understand. The description of the job is incomprehensible because it's full of jargon that I just don't use, and I don't know what it is. Reaching out for something or other into a community of platforms of something, and you're kind of going, I don't even know what this job is for. It also doesn't have the salary on it because you have to apply to find out what that would be, and it's almost like misinformation is now information.
And it does come down into language. I think we're making daily life a game of sort of Byzantine complexity. Everything has been atomized. So a job that would have been a job 20 years ago has been fractured into 30 responsibilities. And each one of those little fragments of what was once a job has become a job in its own right. Yeah. And in order to make it sound like a job, you have to disguise the pointlessness of it in jargon. Yes. So that people don't actually interrogate what you're saying, and they just. There are so many people. I ask a lot of people what they do, and they tell me what they do, and I've got no idea what they've just said. There are so many occupations out there that people are doing. Yes. God bless them. But I've had it. They've explained to me what they do on several occasions, and I'm none the wiser. Yeah,
And a lot of these people fear that they won't have a job, so they've kind of created an entire area, an entire arena of jobs that they can do. You know, like you could become a diversity coordinator for one organisation, and that means you can go and work anywhere as a diversity coordinator and bring your, you know, years of experience of diversity coordinating, but you don't really know what it means.
I know, and it's everything. I mean, even social distancing. I try not to use that.
I hate
for me,
that.
For me, that means keeping away from people.
Yeah,
which has a different ring to it. What does social distancing even mean? How can you be sociable about being distanced? It's like it doesn't seem to make sense to me in any way. But our language is just littered with these oxymorons and pointless terminology. And I long for people just having straightforward conversations with each other and not falling into these traps. I mean, I still think what I do is quite simple to understand. You know, I write some books.
Yeah.
And when called upon, I have in the past presented the occasional television program, and I think that's very easy for anybody listening to me to know what it is that I then do.
Right.
I write a column for a newspaper. You can get it, and Have you found
yourself being, and here's a word for you, the phrase that you'll hate, differently edited now from the old days? You know, when it used to be edited for quality, as it were, and your editor might say, you know, maybe you could move this around and maybe do this a little bit better. Whereas presumably now you get edited for political correctness, effectively.
Oh, I worked in a local paper in East Lothian Courier, east of Edinburgh, based in Haddington. And we had a terrifying proprietor editor, Kenny Whitson.
Right.
He's no longer among us. And he was a terrifying man because he just shouted.
Right.
He shouted at me a lot.
Right.
I was the deputy editor there. But you know, when you got properly shouted at by somebody, it was fine because you knew what they meant.
Right.
You endeavoured not to do that again.
Yeah.
That wasn't being differently edited. That was being picked up for having made a mistake.
Right. Yeah.
and being shouted at to make sure you didn't do it again.
And often, you know, that now is impossible. It's an impossibility for that to happen anywhere. So the amount of mistakes that get made and don't go kind of punished, because you're not allowed to punish anybody anymore for making mistakes. You have to take them into a room and teach them that, you know, it was probably your fault they made the mistake, and you're very sorry to have to ask them to try and do it again, but could they maybe do it in a slightly better way if that's all right with them? You know, I mean, it just doesn't work for me.
It's why in a way, I mean, if you've come from that environment, you know, where you've been taken into somebody's office, or worse yet, if it's happened in front of everybody, right. You know, you've had one of those dressings down that everybody could hear. It's part of what gives you the armor that when all this sort of social media stuff, all these anonymous things that are coming at you, you know, you don't know who they are. It's not a real name, and it's, you know, they're just anonymous identities for people to hurl abuse.
Yes.
And you think that's just not the same.
It's
not if a physically imposing person has stood with you in an open office,
right.
and lambasted you till you could feel the hot air and the spittle on your face.
We're both remembering those experiences with some kind of warmth, because actually
it was honest.
It was great.
It was an honest interaction.
Of course, and it was stimulating, and you learned something from it, and you never did it again, effectively, if you had any brains. Anyway, well, listen, Neil, we're at the end, I'm afraid. So listen, very nice to see you again. We'll talk again next week. All will be well, I'm sure, for Nicola Sturgeon, but we'll see how soon she starts making decisions about lifting Scotland out of the gloom and doom. Neil Oliver there reporting in from Stirling, where it's probably just as foggy as it is here, certainly a lot colder